Is it plausible, therefore, that there really was a Trojan War, and that at least the fact of the war was passed down through oral tradition for 400 years or so until 800 BC, when Homer's poems were finally taken down? My own opinion is that this is plausible. There must, in fact, have been a Trojan War. Otherwise, why would anybody have sung about it in the first place?
Parry's work confirms that one person can not only memorize songs as long as the Iliad and Odyssey, but that the accounts can be historically true. For the first time, there is an understanding of how the story of Troy could survive 500 years until the time of Homer, and how Homer's greatness is born.
Homer must have been a very famous singer in his day. He must have been like the Rolling Stones. He was a very famous entertainer of some kind. It's plausible that his greatness as a poet, which is proven by the Iliad and the Odyssey, by his brilliant poems that have survived, did inspire somebody to record these stories. Indeed, the very man who invented the technological means that made the recording possible, that is, the Greek alphabet.
Before Homer, epic stories were memorized and sung. These oral tales were usually performed at the feasts of aristocrats and noblemen. But Homer's story of Troy was so powerful that someone wanted a way to record the words and teach them to others. The problem was the Greeks had no system of writing. So one theory is that this someone, the first Greek scribe, adapts the Phoenician writing system, adds vowels, and invents the Greek alphabet to record the words of Homer.
Here's an example based upon early epigraphic remains of what this text might have looked like. It begins on the right-hand side, back and forth, as the ox turns, the Greeks said, comparing this style of writing to the plowing of a field where you plow up one end and back the other and back again.
Now, with Homer singing to a scribe, these heroic stories of Troy, the first in Greek history to be written down, inspire a much greater audience.
In my opinion, is because they were the first texts that ever existed in the Greek vocal alphabet. And as such, they were used from the very beginning as the basis for instruction about how to use this writing system. And they never stopped being that. So when you went to school in ancient Greece, you studied the text of Homer, right back to the day that the man who invented the alphabet first wrote them down.
Homer's story of Troy becomes the tool by which language and literature are taught, the very foundation of Western civilization. For the next 3,000 years, his story of Troy will inspire the greatest Greek and Roman writers, Renaissance artists, Shakespeare, and even Hollywood films. But over the centuries, the true story of Troy is blurred by myth, and Troy the city, a ruin even at the time of Homer, is covered by the sands of time and lost. Then, in the 19th century, inspired by Homer's account of battle, blood, lust, and deceit, a rich adventurer goes in search of the treasures and the true story of Troy. It is a Bronze Age clash of cultures, a battle over the most beautiful woman in the world. This tale of heroes, blood, lust, and deceit from a time before writing is sung for hundreds of years. Then the greatest of Greek singers, Homer, sings of Troy so powerfully he inspires the invention of the Greek alphabet. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are the first written works of ancient Greece and become the foundation of Western civilization. But over time, the story of Troy is obscured by myth, and the city is lost. Now, can Homer's Iliad and Odyssey lead explorers to the treasures of this legendary city and rediscover the true story of Troy? July 6th, 1827. After centuries of Ottoman occupation, Greece wins its independence and emerges as a new nation. Europe is smitten with everything Greek, and Homer's Iliad and Odyssey ignite Trojan fever. With a pick in one hand and the Iliad in the other, a German-American self-made millionaire, Heinrich Schliemann, sets off to uncover Troy.
Heinrich Schliemann is actually a fascinating man. He's a Wall Street tycoon of the 19th century. He made a great deal of money speculating in Russia and in the United States, including the gold rush in California. Having made a great deal of money and therefore being able to retire from his business pursuits, he at this point can go and pursue what he claimed was a lifelong fixation with Greece and particularly with the Trojan War.
Heinrich Schliemann has a knack for finding gold. He's in California for the gold rush, makes millions in St. Petersburg under the Tsars. And in his search for profit and adventure, he dresses as a Bedouin, circumcises himself, and sneaks into Mecca. In 1868, he moves to Athens and launches a campaign throughout the Aegean in search of the legends of Homer and ultimately Troy.
Schliemann was not an archaeologist, but he had a sacred faith in Homer. I mean, Homer was his Bible. And this led him to discover things which nobody else had thought of discovering, of looking for, let's say.
Schliemann sets out to look for a place that matches the landscape described by Homer in the Iliad. A vast plain where two great armies can battle, near the Aegean Sea, between the Scamander and Simois rivers. A place with high fortified walls, from which the Trojans could watch in horror as their champion Hector is dragged behind the chariot of Achilles around the city. Elizabeth Reardon, architect for the excavations currently underway at Troy, retraces Schliemann's steps on the plains of modern Turkey.
Heinrich Schliemann was convinced that Homer was writing about a place that actually existed. And he was also convinced that this place here, known as Hisarlik, was where he was going to find Troy. He thought that if he excavated all the way down to bedrock, whatever it was he found at the bottom had to be the Troy that Homer had written about.
In 1870, Schliemann and his hundreds of workers plow through thousands of years of civilization, cutting trenches in the mound running north to south and east to west. The Trojan plain becomes littered with Schliemann's piles of what he considered rubble. He digs for years, but finds no evidence of Homer's Troy. He's getting desperate.
What he really needed was a big, splashy find. The man was very lucky because at the end of his third year of excavating, he made a find that fit that bill. He was investigating this very large fortification wall when they uncovered in a small pocket a treasure trove of gold objects. This was exactly the kind of find that he needed to get attention.
Golden cups and goblets, highly polished stones and precious jewels. In 1873, Schliemann smuggles the treasure out of Turkey, dresses his wife in the jewels like Helen of Troy, and with Barnum-like showmanship, claims he has uncovered King Priam's treasure. He dazzles the world with headlines. Heinrich Schliemann discovers legendary Troy. But the showman's headlines prove false. The treasure Schliemann finds dates to 2,500 years earlier than Priam and does not correspond to the time of the Trojan War. And worse, Schliemann may have stolen his discovery of Homer's Troy.
Schliemann, with his interest in Homer, was not the first in this area. Frank Calvert a British expatriate, had been living in the area from 1845 onward. He grew up in this area and gradually amassed a tremendous amount of textual evidence for where Troy lay.
When Schliemann arrives in Turkey, there are several sites thought to be Homer's Troy. But Frank Calvert is convinced that the land he owns, a mound named Hisarlik, is Ilium, an ancient Greco-Roman city from which Homer titles his Iliad. Schliemann seeks out Frank Calvert.
When Schliemann came to the Calvert house in August 1868, Calvert's house was full of artifacts and works of art that Calvert had excavated from Hisarlik, from Troy. Now, when they had dinner, Calvert told Schliemann all about his excavations, showed him what he had found, and Schliemann was clearly very impressed.
Schliemann goes back to Athens, and without ever setting foot on the site, writes his first book on Troy. The problem is, he doesn't know the details.
Calvert wrote Schliemann answers to Schliemann's many questions, one of which was, how high was the mound? Was it 20 meters or 100 meters high? The very fact that Schliemann would ask this question shows that he had absolutely no concept of the site itself.
Though Calvert has been quietly digging by himself for years, Schliemann pours his vast wealth into a grand excavation with hundreds of workers and is anything but quiet. Schliemann tells the world that he's the sole discoverer of Troy and literally leaves Frank Calvert in the dust. Despite false claims of Priam's treasure and accusations of stealing the site of Troy from Frank Calvert, Heinrich Schliemann convinces the world that Hisarlik is the site of Homer's Troy and that the Trojan War is real.
Schliemann was somebody who dedicated his life, his fortune, and his activities to proving Homer true. And this has my respect.
It's largely because of Schliemann that we're asking the question, was this war real? Today we still follow in that tradition in asking questions about the Trojan War.
But even Heinrich Schliemann, perhaps the most devout believer in the Iliad as history, can't produce definitive proof of Homer's Troy. Somewhere in these ruins is the promise of finding some scrap of writing, some Trojan treasure to prove beyond doubt that the Trojan War and the story of Troy are real. It is the most legendary war in history, fought around 1250 BC in the prehistoric Bronze Age. The tale of lust and battle is sung for 500 years, until Homer's story of Troy, the Iliad, inspires the invention of the Greek alphabet. Over the next 2,000 years, the legendary city is lost, until in the 1870s, Heinrich Schliemann, with pick in one hand and Iliad in the other, claims to discover the site of the Trojan War. But his showmanship and unscrupulous ways cast doubt on his claims. And worse, his excavations destroy so much of the site that it is condemned as an unreliable witness in the search for the true story of Troy. How could this rock heap in present-day Turkey be Homer's Troy? Even Schliemann expressed doubts. It is all poetry, he says. Troy is a myth, and the site of Hisarlik is only a hill.
In essence, he says in various writings, well, I'm very pleased at what I've done. I've discovered Troy, and so on and so forth. But I'm a little disappointed because based on what Homer says, his description of Troy, I would have thought that Troy would have been bigger.
Where is the proof that